This podcast is funded by Ted Dintersmith, the executive producer of the acclaimed film Most Likely to Succeed, and the author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be.
Hey everyone, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast. I'm your host, Josh Rapoon. Before we start the show, please check out all the resources at whatschoolcouldbe.org and our global online community. If you are a committed education change agent ready to roll up your sleeves and reimagine teaching and learning, simply install the What School Could Be app on your mobile device or navigate to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org. I hope to see you there. My guest today is Jennifer An, the Executive Director of Lead by Learning. Jennifer lives with her husband and children in Northern California. The reason I asked Jennifer to be on the show is because I read an incredible book in 2024 titled Street Data. Carrie Wilson, the author of Chapter 7 of Street Data and the former Executive Director of Lead by Learning, wrote the following for this episode. Quote, I remember over a decade ago, after Jennifer An interviewed for a program associate position with us at Lead by Learning, I had this strong sense that there was nothing she couldn't do. So there are countless wonderful things to know about her. The first, which you are likely to detect in this conversation, is a combination of wicked intelligence and joyful spirit. There is a brilliant dynamism to her approach. She brings grounding, compassion, and clarity, which are much needed qualities of leadership in these uncertain times. Showing up this way, she creates the conditions that allow for vulnerability and also for an expansive sense of possibility and creativity. In working this way, Jennifer has made invaluable contributions to Lead by Learning and to public education. Jennifer designed and implemented the Lead by Learning certificate program. She built robust partnerships with social and emotional learning departments and expanded learning teams. She pioneered Lead by Learning's work with the Chicago Public Schools Fund. She created Lead by Learning's anti-racist affinity networks. And she developed a dynamic team of program leaders who are skilled at creating spaces that hold the complexity of what it means to lead, teach, and learn together. I am forever grateful for the way Jennifer continues to lead and develop Lead by Learning, end quote. As you prepare to listen to this conversation, listeners, ask yourself if the true revolution in education isn't happening in classrooms, but in the minds and hearts of the educators themselves. What if the way forward isn't more training, more compliance, or more performance metrics, but a profound act of unlearning, reseeing, and reconnecting? Jennifer An believes that professional learning should be more than a box to check. For her, it's about mending and reinforcing. Yes, like Sashiko stitching, which she is learning, and about letting art, dance, and story shape our understanding of what it means to grow together. She's an educator who loved throwing clay and dancing, and who now finds renewal in hula. And she sees the deep value in being willing to be disturbed. Finally, listeners, Jennifer An wrote the following words in an online article she shared with me. Quote, in Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer writes, it's such a simple thing, but we all know the power of gratitude to incite a cycle of reciprocity. An goes on to say, when educators appreciate one another's perspectives, and they see how their collective perspectives lead to action, they feel empowered to spread it across the system, end quote. And now, here is my conversation with Jennifer An. Jennifer An, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
So Jennifer, you shared with me some awesome thoughts about life before you became an educator. I'm going to quote the last sentence of what you wrote to me. So here we go. Quote, art taught me how to be humble, to be inspired by the brilliance of others, to be nimble and curious, to relate to others, and to be on a forever learning path. End quote. So, wow. Okay. Our listeners want to hear more about the gravitational pull of art in your life, about throwing pots and dancing in New York City, about the personal connections in your life between art, craft, and being an educator.
I think for me, art is synonymous with liberation, meaning there is a craft and there is a vision, but how I get there and what I ultimately want to create is my own. And the journey of art, whether it's throwing a part or doing a dance, is just riddled with learning. So you have to learn the basics, of course. But as you begin to construct a pot, for example, in the vision you have, you realize that what you thought was possible may not be, or you have to adapt, you have to change, you might have to ask other people questions. But in that process, I think you begin to find yourself, not only what you wanted in the first place, but resilience, problem solving, creativity, curiosity. And in the end, it's liberating because you went on this journey where you had agency and choice, and you took advantage of the things that you had at your disposal and also recognized things that you didn't see before. And so that's kind of an abstract answer, but everything creative that I've done in art, whether it's dance, creative writing, throwing a pot, now hula, I think there's so much humility that you go into that experience with. And if you open yourself up to the learning that takes place in that process, then you become a more curious version of yourself on the way out.
Mm. You know, when I was preparing for today, Jennifer, and I was thinking about, this particular topic, I started thinking about my mom who passed away way back in 1981 when I was still in my 20s. But when she was in her 60s, she started throwing pots. Every Saturday morning here in Hawaii, where I'm based and where I grew up, she would go to this potter's house and they would have class. And I was thinking, about the idea that so late in her life, she was entering into something that you just described, right? It's like, all of a sudden she was finding renewal in curiosity, in resilience, and all the things that you talked about. And I think that's pretty amazing.
I love that because what you're pointing out is that you can do it at any point in your life. That's one of the things I admire about hula, actually. And
Mm.
even my kumu, he tells me that just because he's a kumu doesn't mean he doesn't have learning either, while at the same time telling me that what he has learned is not something that any of the students cannot do. It just is a matter of practice
Mm.
and commitment.
So let's go a little bit deeper into the hula part. You started last year, I understand. And so what is it about hula, the ancient form of Hawaiian dance, that puts a charge in your battery pack each time that you work out, if you will, with your halau, which is the Hawaiian term for the group that's actually working together to practice hula?
What I didn't realize when I started hula is how complex it is.
Mm.
So I think for the average person, you watch a hula dancer or you watch hula and you think, wow, that's pretty. I like it. But underneath that is a story, is a mele. There is cultural significance. There is relationship between the dancer, the music, and the land. There is heartache.
Mm.
Hula was something that was banned in an attempt to colonize Hawaii.
Hmm.
And so I think when I started hula, I didn't actually appreciate or understand those things, but I did open myself to learning. And now I feel such a great appreciation for what I am being given by that community and
Mm.
just so much appreciation that I have been invited into that space.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's stay with art for a second, Jennifer. You shared with me that last year you also got into sashiko stitching, which was used to mend and reinforce clothing, especially in areas prone to wear and tear. It's also used for its aesthetic appeal, creating unique geometric patterns and textures. So, are you in a place right now in your life where mend and reinforce is important, or is the aesthetic appeal the gravitational pull of this kind of stitching?
I love this question so much because it did start with the mending. I grew up with not a lot of money, so I remember watching my mom mend socks
Mm,
using a light bulb. She would put the light bulb in
mhm.
and mend it that way. And she could see beauty in things that were everyday. And so I took that with me. But what I find really inspirational about Sashiko is that you can turn the mending process into something potentially more beautiful than it was before.
Mm.
And this idea of stewarding something that you have versus throwing it away is something I find very interesting in my stage in life. There is knowledge, there is significant story to things that is worth not only appreciating, but taking with you, and then finding a way to create new significance for the person who is the recipient. And so I think Sashiko for me is the actual process of doing that with clothing, but you could really apply those tenets to so many other things.
Yeah. My mom, going back to my mom again, she was a knitter, and I have some regrets in my life. And one of them, I was thinking about this as I was preparing for today, is that all of those hours that she was knitting in the house, it never occurred to me to ask her, "Hey, mom, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about as you knit?" Because she would sit there for hours and just create, all sorts of mittens and sweaters and things like that, which was really crazy when you think that we're in Hawaii. So nobody needs a knitted sweater in Hawaii, but she would just do it. And so what goes through your mind when you're doing this style of sashiko stitching?
What you're pointing out before I tell you what goes on my mind is so critical because what
Yeah.
you're pointing out is space to
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
space to reflect. And that is something that I think is significant, not only in art, but in education, in so many other areas. This idea that we need to value sacred space to think about whatever is a priority in that moment.
Yeah.
And so I think in the beginning, what I was thinking about is literally the stitches. you know,
Yeah.
it is literally the stabbing of a piece of fabric hundreds, if not thousands of times. And so I just wanted that to be perfect. But, there is a magical thing that happens where that starts to become innate. And then your mind can now wander.
Yeah.
And I often think about, well, who is this for? So I mended a pair of pants for my daughter, and I just was thinking about her, what I hope for her, what I worry about for her.
Yeah.
In a related note, I often think about my work when I'm cooking and
Mm,
cutting onions and letting my mind wander.
mm.
You know what is fascinating about those moments is I don't go into it with expectation, but
Yeah.
I always emerge with a takeaway.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And I interviewed John Hattie for this podcast, and he talks about a concept called automaticity, which is exactly what you're describing. After you've done a stitch a number of times and you become quite automatic about doing it, your mind then goes to other places because it doesn't have to focus on that particular activity. And I was like, wow, what a revelation. Because I was thinking about part of what I do for working out is I ride a touring bike long distance. The automaticity of my riding is complete now because I've been doing it for 40 years. And my mind goes all sorts of places, while I'm riding. So that's interesting. Okay, we have to move on from art. Otherwise, we'll stay here all day. So, Jennifer, you cited Margaret Wheatley and her ideas about being willing to be disturbed as influential in your life. And so, wow, I did not know about Wheatley. So this sent me down a rabbit hole where I was gone for a very long time. And eventually down that rabbit hole, I discovered an essay she wrote titled, "Disturb Me, Please." And in that essay, I found this quote, which is long, so bear with me. Quote, "When I'm shocked at another's position, I have the opportunity to see my own position in greater clarity. When I hear myself saying, 'How could anyone believe something like that?' a doorway has opened for me to see what I believe. These moments of true disturbance are great gifts. In making my beliefs visible, they allow me to consciously choose them again or change them, end quote. So in what ways has the life of Jennifer Ahn been informed by this quote and the disturb me please ethos?
What I appreciate about that quote is that it is indicating a point of data that we don't often appreciate, meaning we have emotional responses, things that emerge in real time as we engage with the world. And that data point, as you point out, can help us understand something we value or something we didn't see, or reiterate something that we might not have realized before. And so I think about this story a lot. When I was in fourth grade,
Mm,
there was a writing contest at school, a creative writing contest. And I wrote a short story, as you were, as all of us were asked to do. And
mm,
when I submitted it, I didn't think one way or another about it. I had completed the task. And when I was called to the principal's office, again, this was my first time going into that principal's office. I didn't know what to expect.
mm,
I didn't know why I was being called. And what occurred is the principal and the teacher did not believe that I had written that story.
mm,
And even at fourth grade, the reaction that I had, shock, sadness, confusion,
mm,
was a learning experience where I realized I did write that. Why do these people not think that I can do this?
mm.
Why didn't they ask me? What does this mean? I must be an amazing writer.
Yeah.
I do remember thinking that. And so, it was not a great experience,
Mm,
but it did tell me something about myself, about the world. And I knew I had written that story. And
mm,
so it also was oddly validating and silencing.
mm.
That's just one moment, but I can see that mirrored across my entire life.
Wow, how interesting. I had a similar experience in the seventh grade when I wrote a same kind of assignment. I wrote sort of a dark Gothic novel, short one. And I got called into the principal's office, and then principal sent a note home to my parents that there might be something wrong with me or that I needed to be checked. And I also treated it the way that you treated your experience, which was, wow, I might have written something pretty significant here. So, but I love that here in 2025, Jennifer, this disturb me, please kind of idea, this concept, this ethos is like really critical right now because we, in so many ways, have just all gone into our foxholes and with our weapons and we're not really talking to each other. So does it feel like that to you right now here in 2025?
Absolutely. And I think part of it is because we have forgotten that we're all people and that those belief systems come from somewhere. People don't just create the belief systems that they have. And
Yeah.
what I love to watch in my work is when two educators come together and they may have different beliefs about what is happening for students or what is right for their instruction. And in that moment, if one asks somebody a question, why do you think this? What is making you feel this way?
Mm,
It creates a doorway where that person now has to confront the disturbance or confront the reaction that is happening. And that is a doorway to deepened awareness and actually,
mm,
I think, more possibility. And so, this idea of disturbance, if we were to treat it like Margaret Wheatley says, as a gift,
yeah.
when people ask us questions, when we want to know why other people feel or think the way they do, when people ask us questions and we feel affronted by that, we could also think of it as a gift
Yeah.
where now we have to really re examine why it is that we feel and think and have the mental models that we have.
Yeah. Wow. That's brilliant. Okay. So kind of along the same lines. Interesting segue here. This is going to kind of come out of left field, but my father was a country doctor in Hawaii from the 1930s to the 1980s. And his compassion for his patients ran very, very deep. But he had a sign above the door of his study that read, "Man is no damn good." And his wife and his 7 children, me, the youngest, believed that he believed in this idea with all his mind and heart. Yet here I am, Jennifer, a living, breathing character straight out of the 1913 book Pollyanna by Eleanor Porter, which you cited as influential. So I find myself here at age 66 hugely optimistic about a lot of things, including the future of education in America and the world. So where are you, Jennifer? The sunny side of the street, the side where it's pouring rain, or somewhere in between?
I will always be on the sunny side. I'm a beach person, not a snow person.
Okay.
But I think the reason why I'm there is because there is always something that can be done. And there is power in radical dreaming or freedom dreaming.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's good to recognize that things are hard. It's good to recognize that there is injustice, of course. And what are we going to do about it? I often think of the quote, we are the ones we've been waiting for. And I also think of the quote, small things can lead to big change. And so I feel that if I focus my attention on what is possible, that will lead to greater good. And if I focus that attention alongside others, work with others,
Hmm.
vision with others, you cannot imagine a world that is different unless you think about what that world could look like and what steps could be taken to get there. And
Hmm.
that kind of problem solving, curiosity, I suppose,
Hmm.
that has always been energizing for me.
Hmm. Do you ever find yourself being accused of being a Pollyanna or being naive? And if yes, what does that feel like, or how do you respond?
I do think sometimes, yes. I remember when I was a high school counselor, I was in this class and we tried to counsel one another kind of in role play. And then we
Hmm.
would get feedback. And the teacher told me, Jennifer, you have to stop smiling. The person is telling you something very serious and it's very jarring to see you smiling. So I think it is actually in part a survival mechanism.
Hmm.
So if you grow up with hardship or trauma, there's ways that you learn to move beyond that. I think for me, trying to stay positive, trying to see what a next step could be. I often think of this metaphor. You open the refrigerator and it might be filled with things, some rotten, some fresh. But in my mind, I think, well, what can I make with this? And that has been my philosophy in life in general. And I
Hmm.
think that can be unnerving if it makes other people feel like they can't sit in the feelings and the trauma that they have. And so I do think there is a balance.
Wow. So that's a perfect segue then to this question. You once had a student who was late each day, and therefore, by school mandate, you were required to not count the student's homework. So our listeners want to know the whole story here. Tell us what we need to know. Tell us the story, and then tell us really what we need to take away from this story. And I think it has a lot to do with your view of life and your optimism and the sunny side of the street that you walk on.
Oh, I think about this story so often. So I was teaching AP English in an urban high school, and something I had been told, because it was only my third year teaching, I believe,
Mm.
was in order for students to come on time, there has to be an incentive, or in this case, a consequence. If you check the students' homework right at the bell, that will force students to come on time. Because if they are not there when you check their homework, then it will not count. And that penalty will be the mechanism by which we ensure all students come to school on time.
Yeah.
So, this is kind of where policy and practice don't always align. Because, I think for anybody, you would think, oh, well, okay, sure, that makes sense. And, in my year 3, I thought, okay, sure, that makes sense. But there was a student who showed up late almost every day, and she had her homework every day. And I wouldn't give her credit every day. And I could tell that it would impact her. She was not happy. She would be disgruntled. But, she still did her homework every day and she still came to school, to my
Yeah.
class every day. She was just late. So I realized maybe I should just ask her why she's late.
Yeah.
What a novel idea, right? No.
Yeah.
One day I asked her, why are you late? And then we went on in a long conversation where she told me that she was living alone, essentially emancipated, that she was combing her hair with a fork, that she was trying to come to school every day, but that sure her ride situation was not consistent. Sometimes she would have to walk to school.
Hmm.
And, the story is not just about a recognition of her humanity, which I didn't fully see before, but it is also a recognition that policy has some limits,
Yeah.
meaning policies are made blanket for everybody, but there are moments where we may need to trouble what that policy will mean when you practice it. And in that moment, I realized I don't care as much that the student is late, as much as I care that she's coming on time, that she's doing her work and actually learning. She was producing wonderful work.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, she became an English teacher.
Wow.
But yes, I remember I had a mentor tell me policies are important. And then leaders' jobs is to, our job is to figure out when we should break that policy.
Hmm. Jennifer, here at age 66, and I've been in this What School Could Be work for more than a decade now, and also with my 17 years in the classroom, I find myself, as I listen to you describe that story, I find myself getting cranky. And I start thinking about concepts like educational malpractice, and that somebody somewhere who had no understanding of what motivation actually is, doesn't understand brain science, doesn't understand what it means to actually listen to young people and to, gain a depth of understanding about their lives and what's going on in their lives, made a policy like this that probably caused a lot of pain. And I get cranky and I start wanting to shout educational malpractice. And so, I don't know, maybe there's not really a question in here, but I just wonder what you think about that. It's like, how many times do we have to go through this and how much pain do we have to inflict on kids before we finally get somebody like you who says, hey, maybe I should just find out what's happening with this kid in her life? I just wonder what you think.
I actually think it's an apt metaphor or comparison because I remember in graduate school, one of the things we were told is something that is also told in the medical field, which is first, do no harm. So in education, our goal is to support students, young people on their journey to adulthood so that they can experience joy, thriving, success, and become members of our community in their adulthood. And I think in that journey, if we forget that they are people and become more preoccupied with the structures that we have put in place that we think will support them, then I think we've missed the point. And so I
Yeah.
do agree with you. And I think about that idea all the time. First, do no harm.
Yeah. I heard a wonderful podcast yesterday on being, which is one of my favorites. And Krista Tippett interviewed a guy named David Bornstein, and they were talking about journalism, and he was articulating a Hippocratic oath for journalists. And it was just like fascinating. And we at What School Could Be have actually been thinking about that idea of what a Hippocratic oath for educators would look like. And of course, it would start with do no harm, but oftentimes we do. Okay, so one more question before we go to our first break. So Jennifer, I'd like to propose that all 42,000 middle and high schools in America have a Jennifer On with Jennifer On skills, habits, and dispositions parked in its so-called teacher lounge once per week for X number of hours. So what would be the result if I were to wave my magic wand, replicate you 42,000 times, and park you in these 42,000 teachers' lounges? And listeners, I'm asking this question based on a story that Jennifer shared with me about being in a teacher's lounge and what happened. So what do you think?
You're bringing up so many memories because a student of mine actually gave me that time turner that Hermione has in Harry Potter where you can be in two places at once. So you're doing that multiplied by thousands in these schools.
Yes.
What I think is one of the most challenging parts about being an educator is the number of decisions you have to make alone in the course of a day.
Yeah.
And the number of priorities you have to balance alone over the course of a day. And I say alone because, there's this egg crate model where teachers are in their classrooms and that's where you teach the students and you don't get to talk to any of your colleagues really until the end of the day, or maybe you had a little bit of time during break or before the day. And so what I was doing is not anything revolutionary, but I think is something that is important, which is by putting myself in the lunchroom, I just made myself available. And teachers who would say, "Oh, I don't have time to talk to you. I have to make copies." What I found fascinating is in their copying or in their doing of other things, they would tell me so many things about their day and the challenges that they were going through. Or, "Oh, this student said this, and I don't know what that means." And maybe in some ways gave me more information about them than I could have gotten if we had a structured, more formal conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it also indicated to them that there was someone who cared about them and what they were going through. And what they had experienced was just as important as learning a new book or a new curriculum. What teachers encounter day to day are so important and deserve exploration and investigation. They should be studied. Teachers' relationships, interactions with students day to day reveal so much about what school is doing for the individuals in that community. And teachers don't have the space to talk about it with someone who they trust. And so that's what I was trying to do in that lunchroom. And what's funny is I'm actually going to go to a party this coming Friday for somebody who's leaving that school. And I will see a bunch of those teachers. I'm in communication with those teachers. I just held the baby of one of those teachers maybe 2 months ago. And I just find it incredible what relationship and connection can be built by just making yourself available.
That's brilliant. And it's a little bit of a preview of where we're going to go after the break when we start talking about Lead by Learning. So, hey, everyone, we've been talking to Jennifer Ahn. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Greg Bear, along with Ryan Rudzeski, and we're the co-hosts of the Remaking Tomorrow podcast,
a series of conversations about the future of learning.
We encourage you to find and listen to the Remaking Tomorrow podcast wherever you listen to your pods.
You'll find over 60 past episodes that you can browse and listen to whenever you'd like.
Remaking Tomorrow is powered by Remake Learning. Learn more at remakelearning.org.
Do you believe there's a better way for individuals to learn and fulfill their human potential than in traditional schools? If so, then join me on my 2 podcasts, The Future of Education and Future You, where we explore these issues and more. My name is Michael Horn, and I've been working to build a better future for all individuals for over 15 years. I'm the co-author of multiple books on the future of learning, including my latest, From Reopen to Reinvent. And you can also stay up to date with all my writing through my Substack newsletter, The Future of Education. Join me as we create the future of learning together.
Hey folks, my name is Aaron Moniz and I'm one of the co-founders of Inspire Citizens. We help schools develop systems and level up programs so that they can live that mission of using schools to make a difference in the world.
If you want to hear what this sounds like directly from students, listen to our Empathy to Impact podcast. We amplify the voices and stories of students who make a difference in their communities.
Let these students' voices inspire you about how you can help make a difference in your community today.
Hey everyone, we are back with Lead by Learning's Executive Director, Jennifer Ahn. So Jennifer, before we get into what Lead by Learning does, I'd like to talk for a minute about teams. So I spent some time looking at your staff webpage, which, given my interest in teams, how teams work, what makes for great teams, led me to wonder about your team. So what is it about Sarah, Malia, Nina, Maru, Brooklyn, Nee, Charlie, Huan, and Kailani that makes them the team they are and your Lead by Learning team?
I truly don't think that our organization would be what it is without those folks. And so I'm so glad that you're naming them aloud.
Mm,
There is an ethos to every team. And the ethos that we have, first and foremost, is purpose driven. All those folks are in that room because they believe that education is important and that in order for education to actualize its promise of supporting students to grow, learn, thrive, that the adults in the room have to have similar experiences, have to have opportunities of learning as well. And each person is not, you see roles underneath people's names, but that is because that's where their primary focus is.
yeah.
But everybody is willing to roll up their sleeves and do work when it is required. All of us take ownership of this work, take pride in this work, and will help each other when needed. I will move tables, no problem. I will set up food, no problem.
Right.
And that's true for everybody. And so people work hard. It's an all women organization.
hmm
I feel like there's just so much power in the trust that we have in one another
hmm
and the commitment that we have to the work.
That's awesome. When I pulled my team together, when I stepped into this director role last July, one part of the process that we went through to become a team was that instead of me hiring, somebody who was going to be a social media director, basically that person, we spent some time playing and allowing the person to create their own title. And we actually employed AI in the process, which was really fun. And in the end, they got to choose from a list that they had created in their companionship with AI. And wow, in the end, the ownership of that title, the purpose that's behind it, was phenomenal. It was such a simple thing. And so I love what you're saying about your team. And I just am very fascinated, Jennifer, with the dynamics of teams and how teams come together. So that's actually a perfect segue into now really jumping into what Lead by Learning does. So I want our listeners to know what Lead by Learning is and what it does, and they can explore your website for sure. But let's do a short lightning round to get some key ideas on the table. So I'll provide a short prompt and you provide a brief response. So here goes. There's 6 of these, okay? So number 1, what does an equitable learning environment look and sound and feel like? And how does it lead to vibrant learning cultures?
There is always agency in a space you just described. And so when you think of students in their learning, there is choice and agency. And the same is true for adults. And I actually think that it's a little bit different than this idea of academic freedom,
Hmm.
meaning that teachers have been given the power to make decisions for their students because they are closest to them. And the reason why they're able to make good decisions is because they are carefully examining what students are experiencing. They're paying attention to the relationships that they have with those students, and they are making adaptive moves to better support those students. And so to me, that space is rich with agency, and it's also rich with partnership. That teacher and that student have a relationship over the course of the year. And in order for that relationship to flourish, they have to pay attention to one another's communication, needs. Teachers have to ask questions of students. Students have to feel comfortable asking questions of adults. So to me, an equitable space has those things.
Awesome. Okay. So number 2, to quote the title of an article you wrote and turn it into a question, what happens in a Lead by Learning design team meeting?
Oh, this is such a good question. A design team meeting assumes that there should be communication vertically across a system. So principals should be talking to teachers, who should be talking to district leaders. And the challenge is, because of the hierarchical nature of our work, those conversations can feel very transactional.
Mhm.
You tell me this, I tell you that. There is not really a sense-making space. But to me, that is critical, meaning in order for the district leader to make strategic moves and a long-term vision, they first and foremost should be listening to the folks on the ground to understand what is happening, what is showing promise and success, what root causes and challenges may be along the way. And that teacher also can learn from that district leader, because that district leader is saying, here is where I see our work leading. The teacher could say, oh, I do like that. And I think maybe we can add this, or maybe there's some tweaking happening. And I know this is lightning round, but I have this great story because I just heard it last week,
Go
where
for it.
the district said, I think we should do grading for equity. Our grades seem capricious. So great. They implemented that. And the teachers and the principals of one high school said, okay, in order to do that, one of the practices we need to implement is allowing retakes. Why don't we allow students retakes? And so they said, okay, let's allow students to have retakes. What they realized in that moment that they decided that to implementation is kids didn't come at lunch after school. Even though retakes were possible, they were not being taken advantage of. And so then the teachers started wondering, why is that? Oh, because the retake is still the full length of, say, a test or an essay. They can't do that in the time allotment that we've given. So what if we just asked for the part that they didn't understand? What if we just focused in on the part that we want them to show us their understanding again? And so they started doing that. They also started texting parents to let them know that retakes were possible. They started asking students, they started asking one another what success would look like in these retakes. And now they have not only gotten more students to retake the test, but in this English department, they've experienced approximately a 10% decrease in D's and F's as a result. And so that could only happen if those different people, the principal, the teacher, the district leader, all came together to talk about what grading for equity would look like, go their separate ways, and then come back and say, what is happening now? What should we be thinking about now? How should we design what we're going to do moving forward?
Wow. Okay. So, number 3, if I gain my certificate from Lead by Learning, what have I gained and how have I grown?
We have a slightly nuanced understanding of leadership. Leadership is many things. We'd like to suggest that it also includes these 3 ideas: being a learner, a partner, and a visionary. And that seems so simplistic, but that is what people not only would develop in themselves in the certificate program, but would also wonder, how do I develop that in others? And so a leader can't lead without being in partnership with the people they are working with. Otherwise, you're a floating head and you do 2 folks. It's very compliance driven. Things will not be sustained. Equally so, you have to be a learner and get curious too. Don't assume that you know everything that's happening. Be willing to learn and to change your ideas and mental models based on what you learn. And then this visionary thing, sometimes I think we take for granted, meaning, of course, I have a dream, I have goals. But when we talk about visionary, we kind of think about it not only as thinking really radically about what is possible, but also remaining committed to the values, particularly a moral imperative, as you think about that vision.
Wow. Wow. On your side of the Pacific, Jennifer, what I'm experiencing would be called goosebumps. On my side of the Pacific, or in the middle of the Pacific, we call it chicken skin. And all of a sudden, I want to go back to school and I want to go back to teaching. Wow. Okay. So number 4, if I am a principal considering bringing in Lead by Learning, how do I balance the pressures of state accountability measures versus the time needed to collect and use so-called street data?
Time is such a precious resource, and there's never enough of it, to be sure. I feel like anytime we're working for improvement in schools, I often think of a stovetop. So some things are on the back burner, they're still simmering and they're there. And
Yeah.
we have to bring the temperature up occasionally, but let them simmer. And then there are certain things that we need to be attending to constantly, stirring constantly. And I think sometimes we reverse what I think is true. And so the compliance measures, the accountability measures, those things are, of course, there. But they should not preoccupy our time to the point where we can't really stir what we should be stirring, which is what is happening for our students.
Yeah.
How are we ensuring that all students have access to the learning experiences that will help them thrive? How do we ensure we have culturally responsive methodology? All the things, those to me are the way that the things in the back burner will happen. Sometimes we think of them as separate, but I don't think we'll ever move forward unless we agree that we have to attend to some things all the time and release some things until the moments that we have to attend to them.
Wow. Brilliant. Okay, number 5. I'm still that principal, inspired by something Sarah Sugarman said in a podcast. When does Lead by Learning step away from my campus and consider its work done?
That is the dream, to to work ourselves out of a job.
Yeah.
What we really hope will happen is a systems change. And when we say systems change, we mean a culture change where there is enough practice, cultural norm, ritual in place in a school where the idea of inquiry, of adaptive expertise, of constant exploration of what is happening for students, that's so baked into everything that's happening at that school that we can just walk away and it happens. And the way that that becomes baked in is purely by the people practicing it over and over and over again. And so we start in schools and notice there is resistance. Over time, people see not only value in student outcome, but value in the way they feel about their work, job satisfaction. We see retention. And ideally, it would be so present that should a principal leave, it would continue to be there. Students would know that they would be asked, what am I learning about and why? Teachers would know that there would be space to talk to one another about the challenges they face and the problems of practice that emerge. And principals would always know that they can set vision so long as it is in community with the people on the ground, and that they actually are the first learners and the first models of what that culture setting is.
Wow. You know, I did an episode with a mentoring program that originally started in Australia. I did this episode 2 years ago, and I have remained friends with the CEO that I interviewed. And last year, this organization came to the conclusion that it was time to start a 10-year countdown clock. And so they put it right up on the front page of their on the landing page, on their website landing page. And this 10-year countdown clock is the end of the organization. And everyone in the organization now knows that that clock is ticking. And I was floored by that idea. So anyway, that was partly the inspiration for number 5. Okay, number 6. One more time. I am that same principal, and it's May of 2025. Anti-racism work is on the defensive, it feels like, in every state. So how do I even think about this kind of work at this moment?
It is unfortunate that it is on the defensive because I think anybody can see through history and through experience, just looking at people being detained with no due process, that obviously there is inequity in this country.
Yeah.
How that manifests in schools is something that is important to investigate still. And so, even though this idea of anti racism feels threatening to some folks in our country, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it.
Mm.
And it doesn't mean that it won't benefit the students in the end. Sometimes we have to make decisions about what we will prioritize in the face of pressure.
hmm
I don't think that schools will become equitable places, better places for students, unless we continue to explore how disparities with regard to race, gender, learning difference, all the things are manifesting, because schools are a reflection of the greater world. And students, as young people, are learning how to navigate those things in real time. And if we, as the adults in the buildings and schools, aren't paying attention to them and trying to improve them, the students can see that, and the students will feel that. And particularly in spaces where it may be more privileged, if we don't address those things, those folks will then become adults who have privileged positions in our society, and they will not have recognized that there is continued injustice.
And so, if I'm understanding Lead by Learning correctly, I, the principal, I'm understanding that as we go through this work, I am not walking alone, that I am walking together with the faculty, with parents, with students, with Lead by Learning. And that's a really important element to understand as you begin the work, right?
I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like, oh my gosh, that is the most important thing. Even right now, I think walking a road alone that is, possibly risky for yourself,
Yeah.
it's improved for everybody if you walk that together. You feel more safety in numbers, of course, but also you can do more things together.
Wow. Amazing. Okay. So before we go to break, I want to kind of put all of this into a sort of use case. The opportunity is too good to pass up. So you shared a short film from 8 years ago that you are in. And the film is in my mind, gold standard look at what educators' professional learning could be and how that learning translates into the classroom. And you recently watched Ted Dintersmith's film, Most Likely to Succeed, which is the inspiration for this podcast, and which is now 10 years old, and which does two things. It argues that education systems are increasingly obsolete in the age of hyperacceleration and AI, and it showcases a school in San Diego it feels is an example of innovative teaching and learning 15 years into the 21st century. And I say 15 because the film came out in 2015. So let's imagine this as a design thinking moment, Jennifer, and watching MLTS was your empathy phase. So what I would love is for you to critique Most Likely to Succeed through the lens of Lead by Learning. As you watched the film, now 10 years old, where did you see examples of Lead by Learning, and where did you see Lead by Learning opportunities?
I appreciated that the teachers were told, you can teach whatever you want. And I also appreciate that in the film, it was clear that the teachers were paired with somebody else, so they weren't alone. And so there was some interdisciplinary projects taking place. And I also like that the students were given opportunities to take risks and make mistakes, which is really fundamental to Lead by Learning. There is a myth of certainty that we're trying to bust open in the field, which is nobody has the answers. And the reason why is because teaching and learning is dynamic. And the people we're teaching, the environment in which we're teaching is constantly evolving, as the film points out. And so if we can create space and actually value and honor those moments when we make mistakes, when we don't know, when we have to pivot, those also can then help position us to make better decisions moving forward. And so all that I loved about the film. And I think my opportunity that I see is that it didn't really give a glimpse into what the teachers were talking about and collaborating on in order to make experiences happen for students. And also, I think there was probably this taking place, but there wasn't as much visibility on it, is how much the teachers were watching what the students were doing and then coaching based on what they were observing. And so to me, no teacher works in a bubble. Why? Because students go through grade by grade, discipline by discipline in high school. If we don't work together, what a disjointed experience students will have. And then furthermore, if I'm a teacher in there and I have a project and I don't have a colleague telling me maybe some of the assumptions or the stories I'm telling myself about these students and learning, maybe there's something worth further interrogation there, or maybe there's an assumption that I have that is not true. If I don't have the eyes of my colleagues helping me see what I can't see, if I just continue on from start to finish, assuming I have certainty when in fact I do not, then there's some risk there. And so I'm sure that that school does that, but that film didn't really place as much attention on that. And so my fear sometimes is that, you know, people will see that model and go, oh, we can replicate that without recognizing the amount of energy it takes to really ensure that the teachers and the educators are building their capacity to do that.
Wow. And what I love about what you just shared is that High Tech High is now, I think there are 14 or 15 schools in the high tech system, elementary, middle, and high school. And they are kind of the seat in America, if you will, of deeper learning. And every year, the Deeper Learning Conference every spring is held in San Diego on the campuses of the high-tech schools. And yet what I'm hearing is that even a location like High Tech High, which turned into a bit of a mecca after the film came out, everybody wanted to go there and see what was going on, is that Lead by Learning could actually do extensive work there. Even though they are that seat of deeper learning, there's always so much more that you can gain. And as you pointed out, one of the things that the film sort of doesn't show is the conversations between teachers. They're speaking to the camera, but they're not really talking to themselves. So I just love the idea that even if you're so-called, deeper learning organization, Lead by Learning still has a lot to offer, right?
I would like to think so.
Absolutely. Okay, so hey everyone, we've been talking to Jennifer An. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Ricardo.
I'm Mary.
And I'm Liz.
And we co-host Course Stories, a podcast produced by the Instructional Design and New Media team at Arizona State University.
In this podcast, we tell an array of course design stories alongside other ASU Online designers and faculty.
Join us as we talk to the course design experts about shaping the future of online education. Tune into Course Stories, where innovation meets instruction.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Course Stories!
Perfection.
Hey there. Are you interested in hearing weekly conversations with authors, leaders, and practitioners at the forefront of learning and education innovation? Then you'll love the Getting Smart podcast. This podcast amplifies the incredible work being done by some of the most innovative minds in education. Learn new leadership styles, new technologies, new frameworks and mindsets, and get the fuel you need to stay motivated and curious. Together, we can empower all learners to thrive. It's available at gettingsmart.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Ever made a tough decision and looked back and wondered, what did I miss? What happened? What could I have done differently? I'm Peter Stievelman, the host of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership podcast. After nearly 30 years in education, I know that real leadership isn't about perfection. It's about learning from mistakes, embracing growth, and lifting each other up. Join me each week as I talk with leaders who reflect on their challenges, their relationships, and the lessons that made them stronger. Because imperfection, that's where the real learning happens. Listen now on your favorite podcast platform.
Hey everyone, we are back with Lead by Learning's Executive Director, Jennifer An. So, Jennifer, you and I both read an article in The Atlantic by the neoconservative essayist David Brooks, and it's titled How the Ivy League Broke America. And Brooks argues that our current meritocracy overvalues narrow definitions of intelligence and success, standardized test scores, elite college admissions, and academic hoop jumping, and undervalues the non-cognitive traits that actually shape meaningful lives, like curiosity, collaboration, and a sense of purpose. So at Lead by Learning, you work with educators to center equity, learning, and reflection in their professional growth. So how does Lead by Learning's approach help dismantle the old meritocratic sorting system and cultivate the kind of human-centered qualities Brooks believes we need in a healthier, fairer society? And I'm not sure if this is a fair question because of the assumption baked in, but there you go.
Well, I think meritocracy breeds a certain mindset, which is that I am doing this for myself and that my success is something that I've done on my own. But I think at Lead by Learning, particularly when we think about schools, success is a collective success. And we make assumptions about what skills people have. So we think the skills that you just described, curiosity, care, commitment, inquiry, all those things, I think, assume, particularly for adults, that they already have those things because, like you said, they're human-centered. Maybe by nature, because we're human, we do these things. But actually, I think that maybe young kids do it, but we educate it out of them as they go through the school system. And then we get confused when people don't know how to work together, problem solve together, make decisions together, learn and find ways to collaborate. We get confused. Or in schools, what we've noticed is people assume if we just create space and time for people to get together, then they'll collaborate and do the things that we need them to do. But this is, of course, not true. And the reason why it's not true is because we do not necessarily value that people need to learn and talk with one another. We think that, well, talking is nice, but what about this standardized test that we have to improve? Or, I think it's good that we collaborate, but what about, the fact that we have this urgent crisis right here? And so I think what meritocracy does is create these false kind of silos or dichotomies between things. And what we at Lead by Learning try to suggest is they are so intricately linked, meaning that if we want to create pathways for students to learn and then achieve based on opportunities that they have in front of them, then we have to collaborate. And not the kind of collaboration where I tell you what I'm doing and you tell me what you're doing, but really brave conversation about the struggles that we're having, the students that we're not yet able to serve, the fact that maybe we're working really hard, but they're not yielding the outcomes that we want. Those are not conversations that we are inclined to do naturally because, quite frankly, they can be uncomfortable sometimes. But I do think that we should value that space and that conversation as much as the outcome, because the outcome won't come unless we have moments to collaborate and get curious about our work.
Wow. So, okay, I'm going to squeeze in a follow-up question then. Brooks wrote, schools should prepare people to build things, not just to think things. And I wonder what your reaction is to that. And of course, based on what you just said, my mind immediately goes to one of the things that we build is relationships and that we don't do it alone. We don't walk alone. I wonder what you think about that.
That is so true. And I think that sometimes I think, okay, this may seem weird, but I think about like my marriage. So we're building a life together.
Yeah.
Those educators are building a school together.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you have to be in relationship with one another. Meaning, if I don't like my husband, how are we supposed to build a life together? And that seems so obvious. And then you have teachers who don't have opportunity to connect, not just on personal levels, but also on professional levels, then how are we expecting them to work together to enact change? And then we get upset when they don't yield the results that we think that they should. But I do think that this idea of building and the building of relationships is very much linked together. And I think Lead by Learning is trying to create a space where we recognize that learning is social and emotional for students and for adults, and that in order for those teachers to not only have those conversations, but have the will and the resilience to make forward progress and to question their practice and improve what they're doing, they need space to recognize the social and emotional elements that go into their work.
I love that. And, last week I do it every month. I attend Getting Smart's town hall meetings, which I love. It's like 60 to 100 educators in the middle of the day. And it's always based on some topic, and it's super interactive, and the chat just absolutely lights up. And last week's town hall was focused on robotics. It was actually titled Robotics Rising. And there were 3 presentations by different organizations that are doing robotics work. And I think maybe what got missed, Jennifer, is that we were all talking about building robots, but we weren't talking about building relationships. And I wonder that we don't spend enough time talking about the kinds of things that we can build, or we get stuck in sort of siloed thinking about the things that we build as if somehow they're physical or they're a score on a test or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
I agree. And there's research that shows us that, students will work harder for teachers who they feel connected to.
Yeah.
And we don't even need the research. I love research, and it's always so much of because if you just look back at your own life, of course, you work harder you trust people that you have relationship with. And I think the relationship, people might think it's not important, it's wooey, I don't know, whatever word people want to describe.
Yeah.
But the truth is, the reason relationship is critical, first and foremost, is that it requires us to see one another as humans.
Yep. Yeah.
And that is particularly important when we think about families and students who have been most marginalized, who we don't always see humanity in. And then I also think relationship assumes that we are together, whereas I think other structures assume that we are separate. And so relationships, so often undervalued. I agree.
Yeah. And, I go back to my reading of Street Data, which is the reason why I'm having you on the show today. The deep humanity of collecting street data, of getting to know people, which is the precursor to building relationships between student to student, student to teacher, staff, whatever. It feels like such a no-brainer. And the research is so clear about it. And yet people carry around all sorts of beliefs like, hey, maybe the best way to get kids to do their homework is to, give them a 0 if they're late. So anyway, sorry, I don't want to get off of my soapbox there. Okay, so Jennifer, segue. I wondered about projects you were working on, of which it turns out there are legions. Today, there is only time to ask about one of them. So last year, you started working with school psychologists and counselors on their adult learning, and you shared that you were blown away by the complexities and high stakes of their work. So, wow, this is a big topic, I understand, but let's have you explain what you have learned so far in this project.
I think that I was blown away because I think school psychologists reflect what I think we are expecting of schools as a society. And so I'll give you an example because I just met with them last Friday, actually.
Okay.
A school psychologist on paper is supposed to assess students' needs and direct them to appropriate resources. Well, students have a great deal of need, particularly some students who are entering into the special education world. And so one school psychologist was saying, not only does this student have learning difference, this student is also homeless.
Yeah.
This student, because they're homeless, has some, there's smells, which then cause students and teachers around the student to not want to engage with them.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the student is stealing food at school because they don't have enough food. And then the teacher is getting upset because the student is not charging his Chromebook, which all students are being asked to do before they come to school. But it is because he has nowhere to charge a Chromebook. And so that's just one of, so many stories that I've heard within this group. And so here is this one person, the school psychologist, who is now being tasked to give this student the resources that he needs. This school psychologist is talking to the student's teachers, the principal, trying to figure out McKinney-Vento stuff. Where can this person live? Food. I mean, this person is not just problem solving this student's learning. It's literally so many other needs that this student has. And I think that's what we expect of schools now. Schools are now community spaces where we want kids to not just learn, but be fed, to have basic needs met, all the things. And so when I learned about these stories, and I also learned how siloed these positions are, meaning there's usually one school psychologist, and the fact that they don't get to talk to one another. I just could not believe, first of all, how hard these folks were working, but I also could not believe how much benefit there was from these school psychologists talking to one another. And I can't emphasize enough that sometimes for those of us who don't see these needs day to day, there are students and families with incredible need. And if we only have one person trying to navigate that without support from colleagues, I don't know how successful we can truly expect that to be.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And right here, I'm going to name one of my education superheroes. Her name is Ann Mahi, and she is the executive director of the Hawaii State Teachers Association. But she spent 40 years in public school administration here in my home state of Hawaii. And when she became a complex area superintendent, Jennifer, one of her first moves was to create an association of school counselors. I think she had 25 schools in her district. And for the very first time, these school counselors were getting together monthly to talk to each other, to go through a sort of lead by learning process. And the results were immediate and very impactful because of the street data it was being shared, across from counselor to counselor. So I always look back at that as a really shining example of just such a simple innovation of breaking out of that one siloed position where you're receiving all of the pressure and all of the information and you have to deal with everything. And now you have a chance to not walk alone. That appears to be a theme that's emerging out of our conversation today, is that you don't have to walk alone in this. So that's great. Okay. So Jennifer, last year I read a book titled The Good Ancestor. And in it, the author talks about something called cathedral thinking, meaning a way of seeing one's work as laying the cornerstone to a structure that people will be working on generations after they have passed away. So in what ways is your work and the work of Lead by Learning best captured through the metaphor of laying cornerstones of a grand cathedral to educator learning, a cathedral that might take decades, if not more, to build?
I think I have to start by honoring the folks who started that journey before me. So Anna Rickert, who was our founding faculty, she had a belief, which was teachers who care about their students and take time to learn about them, they will do better for them. And in order for them to do that, they need to talk to one another about their work. And she started by having pizza at her house and just inviting teachers over. And now it has become this. And the reason it has become this is because anybody who experiences powerful learning and is an educator wants to pass it forward.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I like to think of Lead by Learning as housing really a family of educators. And we all have similar values, just as many families do, which is we believe that we can have powerful influence over our students and over the ed system as well. And that what we're experiencing on the ground day to day is very important to look at when thinking about building this cathedral. And that in order for schools to improve, we have to be willing to interrogate, interrupt, and rebuild based on what we're seeing students need, not just what we see as being a potentially best practice. And what I'm hoping will happen over time is that this belief, coupled with the practices that enable teachers and educators to really live those values, those are things that become embedded into any professional learning strategy and any strategic planning. Meaning, we so often just say, oh, I want students' math scores to improve.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to get this curriculum and get some input. The teachers will go to a training, and then we'll have the principals kind of steer the resources and do some progress monitoring. And then at the end of 3 years, boom, it'll happen. But there's this big, unknown, which is the active implementation. And I think that process, that journey, if people embed the kinds of practices that Lead by Learning has, public learning, supportive challenge, everything being data around you, that implementation process will be the driver of not just that goal, but even greater change that they didn't initially assume could happen, because they're actually trying to troubleshoot and improve in real time, not waiting for outcomes to happen 3 years later to realize that maybe some improvements could have been made along the way. And so I think that the cathedral analogy seems almost unattainable, and part of our work is to make change feel doable. So maybe instead of a cathedral, what could it be? I don't know.
Well, let me jump in here and say that I actually think, in my mind, listening to you talk about this, the cathedral is an apt analogy. And here's why. I'm going to go back to our lightning round and that response that you gave me about when Lead by Learning's work is done. And the thing that really jumps out at me, and I had a chance to actually interview the author of The Good Ancestor back earlier in the year, the thing that really jumps out is the idea that when the cathedral is done, let's imagine that a school and a project you're doing with a school is a Lead by Learning cathedral building project, that once the cathedral is built, that's just the beginning. Because from that point forward is the development of faith. And so if you think of a school as sort of like the cathedral is now built, the culture is built, this vibrant culture of adult and teacher learning, from that point forward, then it's just the process of carrying out the mission and vision that you've built together. It's really that you walk forward kind of almost in a faith-based way, except that you're just watching now from a distance because your work is done, but you don't stop caring, right? I wonder what you think about that.
Oh, I love that idea. That is true. It's not just about what you have built, but what happens there.
Yeah.
I totally think that makes sense. And I do think that the reason why I like that way of looking at the cathedral is because if you just think about the cathedral, then, you built it and then you're done, which I don't think is ever true in education. And I think what you're describing, which is, of course, you need the condition setting, you need the structure in place. And then what you do inside, ritualistically, consistently. Yes, that is maybe the most important part, whether it happens in a huge cathedral or a small cathedral.
Yeah, exactly. You come together as a community and then you walk forward together as a community. That's awesome. Okay, so Jennifer, I typically end episodes by giving guests the opportunity to shout out to someone upon whose shoulders you stand, that person who mentored, coached, guided, sponsored, and lifted you up. And you cited Claire Beauvais and Carrie Wilson, and you cited your husband. So let me frame the question this way. In what ways have your husband, Claire, and Carrie brought joy to your life and work?
They've done it in different ways, but the analogy I think of is when you're running, say, a marathon, you could run it alone, but I think for me, I would get very tired. But having people around me running with me, cheering me on, pushing me when I don't want to go, that has been instrumental. And all three of those individuals have done that. I think Claire, ask anybody. She listens in a way I didn't think was possible. And then the reason why I love it, her name is Claire, short for clarity in my head, is she will ask you this question that will make you think completely differently about whatever it is that you were thinking. And she has done that for me. And Carrie has always told me, again, her name is Carrie, what it means to actually carry the work forward, what it takes, how to maintain focus, how to continue to think big, even when the steps are small. She has done that. And then my husband, I met him when I was 20, which now if I think about my kids meeting their life partner at 20, I kind of go, oh my gosh. But I just remember someone telling me, marry somebody who will make you a better person. And he does that every single day. And he gives me foot massages, by the way. I have never met anybody who has such unwavering love and support for me as my husband.
What is your husband's name?
Stephen Fong.
Awesome. So Stephen, Claire, and Carrie, we're going to dedicate this episode to you. And we thank you for all of the support that you have given Jennifer and also Lead by Learning. And again, Jennifer, I go back to the fact that Chapter 7 in Street Data really jumped out at me. And Carrie Wilson is the author of that chapter. And I reached out to her and she named you as the person who I should interview. So I love the way that this whole thing unfolded. And, I just want to say here at the end that my team at What School Could Be, we often talk about this idea of a Willy Wonka golden ticket. And that when we come across one of these golden tickets in education, it's always an idea, a concept. For example, teaching in teams, that kind of idea. For me, Lead by Learning is one of those Willy Wonka golden tickets. It is something that, I know we want to shy away from saying everybody should do X, but in my mind, our education system in America, public, private, and charter, would be a whole quantum leap forward if everybody had the opportunity to go through what I just experienced, which is a real deep immersion into Lead by Learning. It feels like a golden ticket item to me. So thank you for this time today. Thank you for explaining Lead by Learning and allowing us to be a part of your life and the things that you care about. I can't wait to get this episode out to our listeners.
Thank you so much. I just enjoyed this conversation thoroughly.
Our editor, creative consultant, and sound engineer is the talented Evan Kurohara. Our theme music is created by a remarkable pianist, Michael Sloan. Producer of 12 albums with over 100 songs, Michael Sloan is featured in Apple Music, Spotify, and all major music platforms. You can also find his work on his YouTube channel. Michael has listeners in over 100 countries and 2,000 cities. We'd be grateful if you would support these episodes with Leading Edge, innovative and imaginative educators and students, by giving us your own rating and writing a review wherever you get your podcasts. This series is sponsored by Education Change Agent, Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the award-winning documentary film, Most Likely to Succeed, and author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be. If you are committed to rolling up your sleeves and joining thousands of educators, business professionals, nonprofit leaders, and parents as we reimagine education to be relevant and learner-centered, please join the What School Could Be global online community. Simply log in to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org or download the What School Could Be app from your favorite app store. The What School Could Be podcast is brought to you by Josh Rapoon Productions. Send your feedback to josh@whatschoolcouldbe.org. Follow the show on Twitter WSCB Podcast and on LinkedIn at Josh Rapoon. Listeners, one of the most important things we all can do is to bring kindness and compassion into the world. For sure, we need a surplus of both right now. Until next time, ahui ho, and thank you for listening to the What School Could Be podcast.